Hello and welcome to Comic Island. Today we're going to look at the worst outfits ever worn by Robin in the character's 80-year history. Before we begin, be sure to subscribe to Comic Island for more top 10 videos and other comic-related content. Number 10. Injustice Robin. This one's a little tough because it hails from Injustice 2, a game where you specifically can customize the appearance of characters, and in theory it shouldn't matter too much what the default Robin looks like. Except this is the Robin you see on promotional materials, and thumbnails, and in all the cutscenes of the game's story. The more I thought about this, the more important I realized this iteration of the Injustice costume was. And I'm just not a fan of these desaturated costumes with Robin. This is a character that's supposed to be full of life, instead of weird ridges that look like puffy fabric all along the chest and sleeve. And a logo you can barely make out in a still image, let alone in a fast-paced fighting game. There is a little bit of color and life here, but I just don't love this particular take on Damian Wayne. And it feels silly for the character to have gone from looking like this in Injustice to this in Injustice 2. While there are elements of this costume I do like, especially the detailed utility belt, and I understand people who are a fan of this particular outfit, it's not nearly enough for it to be spared the first spot in this top 10. Moving past this, we turn to the Rebirth era of DC Comics, now a part of DC history I will look fondly back on. After New 52's more controversial moves, broadly speaking, DC used the Rebirth line to bring some of its superheroes and its fictional worlds back to basics. A lot of costumes were refined and returned to a more original state, and generally, those moves were for the best. However, Number 9. Red Robin, Rebirth. One costume from the Rebirth era sticks out quite a bit, and it's a real sore thumb. Tim Drake has always been in a bit of a weird place ever since Damian Wayne showed up. With Bruce's son becoming the new Robin, this left him a little adrift. Not only does he not really have a new identity like Nightwing or Red Hood, Drake's history and character has always been so thoroughly tied to the Robin identity, it feels wrong for this character to lose that title, at least at this point in Tim's development as a person. Red Robin seems like the compromise worth settling on. He retained the Robin identity and by and large the appearance, and most versions of Red Robin's costume easily accomplish this simply by splashing on a little more red to any given Robin outfit, something which had already been a long-standing tradition when it came to Tim Drake. Unfortunately, none of this really applies to the Rebirth look, which is functionally identical to any given Robin outfit, except for that little logo, which is very silly to me. I just don't like this look. It doesn't feel very creative. There's a lot of weird little choices in the armor and coloring around the legs that make the whole thing look a little clunky and unpolished. This is funny because the character is part of a story that's pretty solid at the time, at least until he was kidnapped. Now Tim Drake is back and better than ever. Damian Wayne has given his mantle up as Robin, and if the latest Batman event, The Joker War, is any indication, Tim Drake has returned to the role of just plain Robin, with a new revamped look that strips away a lot of the unnecessary details of the earlier Rebirth edition. The future of Tim Drake's character, as of now, is very much in a cool place, with a lot of potential, and at the very least, this outfit is now part of Tim's past, so whatever comes next, I'm feeling pretty optimistic. Number 8. Arkham City Robin. When Arkham City first came out, I was blown away by the game's quality, attention to detail, and huge innovations in Arkham Asylum's original gameplay. Arkham City still holds up, arguably as the best Batman video game ever made to date. But one tiny narrow aspect of the game I remember even being disappointed by that first time I played through it was the design of Robin. The muted, desaturated look has been used a few times, especially in modern video games, is one of the worst examples of it. Robin's appearance within the actual Arkham City story is relatively small, something I also found disappointing, but you do get to have a bit more fun with the character in the DLC, and he very much is more fleshed out in Arkham Knight, where his costume was revamped and looks a lot better. To a degree, this might be the effect of changing graphics and technology available to game designers over time, because the Injustice 2 Robin outfit is also better than this one. But even then, the alternate costumes available in Arkham City itself look better than the original design they put together specifically for this game. Overall, the Arkham City outfit just looks boring. When you really get into things, I find it's a weird mix of different ideas that don't come together. His chestplate, gauntlets, and boots are all heavily armored, with lots of ridges that don't really seem to do anything, which contrast with the pants that almost look like more regular clothing. The pouches look too flat to be realistically containing all that Robin gear. And at the end of the day, I just like a more colorful version of Robin that stands out a little bit and marking him as a distinct character with his own unique style and sensibility when it comes to Batman. That's Robin, that's who he is. That being said, I don't dislike this or really any of the outfits we've talked about nearly as much as some of the other bigger duds in Robin history. This costume has its fans and I don't disagree with any of them too strongly. Everything from here on out is a bit of a different story. Number 7. PreCrisis Robin. Alright, I've been picking on modern Robins for some time now. It's time for us to dive into the past, back before even the Crisis of Infinite Earths. Back in the era of Infinite Earths, Earth 2 had a long history and legacy. Without getting into all of it, they very much had their own Robin, whose costume was made distinct from the Earth 1 version at some point. And the end result is a pretty poorly thought out design that never really got the detail it needed. The utility belt doesn't look like it actually holds anything, nor does it go along the entire waist, which I find really weird. I'm not a fan of how the mask is combined into some sort of neck piece, or how the costume just kinda came out of nowhere late in the game to better explain the multiverse. The idea is that this is some sort of alternate design for the original Earth 2 Robin, at some point made by a man on Earth 2 who happens to have the same name as the costume's real-world creator, Batman legend Neil Adams. As much as I usually like Adams' artwork from this period, this idea was a dud. You can see what he's going for best when the costume is in action. It's got some interesting aerodynamic abilities thanks to this split cape that kind of works in unique ways, especially compared to other versions of Robin. In some ways, because of those gliding abilities, this is the closest the hero ever actually came to being kind of bird-themed in a way that works. I see the potential here, but ultimately it just doesn't come together. Number 6. Duke Thomas, Future's End. Oh, how fun we get to talk about Future's End again. Duke Thomas's role in this particular story was a cool idea, at least on paper, at a time when Duke was just being introduced as a brand new character, not even yet a vigilante or a superhero of any kind, largely just a helpless victim of various threats that had plagued Gotham in Scott Snyder's run with Batman. Future's End suddenly showed this character would go on to become Robin after Damian Wayne's death. This particular take on Robin is one of the most heavily armored out there, but it just doesn't work visually speaking. I'm not against the idea of a more armored Robin in principle. If it's designed well, an armored Robin can make a lot of sense for a very young man being very well protected against dangerous criminals. There's just something horribly off about this particular version. For one thing, it suffers from, I guess we'll call it over-design. So we have a cool visor thing, but also heavily rich plating, but also more impractical looking pouches, and boots that don't really seem to match the size of Duke's body, and I feel it would cause a lot of problems with that motorcycle. Part of it, I think, is the general idea of Future's End and the New 52 era from which Future's End was published. Everything had to be big, cool, dark, and tough. But the creators behind these books tried so hard and really handled it so poorly they kind of fail on all counts. While writing this script, I stumbled on this really cool take of the same costume that I'm pretty sure was done by a fan on DeviantArt. The more slimmed down look, even with those big boots still around, looks a lot better and I think would have made Duke Thomas into a more natural looking Robin. The shame of it all is this was one of our first looks at Duke Thomas as a character, and I wish it was a better one. Luckily, eventually we would get a Duke Thomas as Robin costume that I really love a couple years after Future's End happened, during an event called the Robin War. And now the character has kind of found a new identity in the form of the Signal, so it's sort of a happy ending, as far as Duke Thomas is concerned. Other characters, well, it's more debatable. Number 5. Pre-Crisis Jason Todd. Jason Todd, before he was struck down by the Joker, was never particularly popular with the fans as Robin. But the version of that character, as he was before he was killed, is nothing compared to what he was in his earliest days before the Crisis of Infinite Earths, back when he was a carbon copy of Dick Grayson and looked like this. Though for most of Jason's earliest days as Robin, he looked a lot more like Dick Grayson, at first this was the look they were going with for Grayson's big replacement like 40 years after Robin was originally introduced. I actually kind of like the idea of the red hair, as that's one of the few things about Jason Todd that was actually different from Dick Grayson pre-Crisis. Remember, in those days, Jason Todd also had an acrobatic family that was also killed off by criminals. But this outfit, with its weird over-the-shirt neck dicky that's connected to the mask, is not a good costume. I don't think I need to explain or elaborate this any further than the mere fact that I just used the word dicky to describe this costume. Number 4. Earth 2 Original. So now we get into a really cool idea that sort of fell on its face. The idea here is that on Earth 2, before the Crisis of Infinite Earths, Dick Grayson, like on Earth 1, grew up. I understand that this happens all the time in the real world with actual children, which is very interesting and I'll have to read up on later. But unlike the Dick Grayson of Earth 1, this version never gave up the mantle of Robin and became Nightwing. Instead, he's one of the few takes of an adult Robin out there, especially in the world of comics. I think the idea itself is really neat, a Robin who just stayed Robin as a career superhero right into adulthood. But the actual outfit and costume they used is a hilarious joke. Yes, this is a little bit dated and from a different time period in the world of the comics. And I like the idea of an adult Robin just enough not to rank this particular outfit too high on the top 10. But overall, this weird, obvious attempt to just take a Batman outfit and with the barest, most embarrassing level of effort, try and make it Robin themed, this is one of the silliest costumes that's ever been associated with Robin or Batman. Sadly, if there's one era that managed to top the silliness of the Silver Age, well, it has to be what I'm becoming more and more convinced is going down in history as the most infamous era of DC Comics. Number 3. Red Robin, New 52. The New 52 was full of questionable choices, although, thanks to Damian Wayne, most of the designs when it comes to Robin were actually pretty decent. One exception that stands out, however, is this Red Robin outfit featured in the Teen Titans series. There's a lot of problems here, mostly centered around the design that is trying so hard to fit in with what is typical of the New 52 brand. So we get this abundance of stuff that's just awful. These inexplicable bands around the arms and chest. A cape that's a little more interesting with the idea of it being kind of feathery. But the New 52 artists split the cape into these lines that are too thin and straight. Fan art and even some of the action figures show what this costume could have looked like and how it could have worked, and even then it's still really silly in my eyes. The overall look feels very dated, and it did when the New 52 first came out. It's the sort of thing you might expect out of the 90s. And you're gonna have to excuse me because we need to go on a bit of a detour, because as the years went on, Tim Drake was actually redesigned. As part of it, and I guess in some sort of acknowledgement of the Grayson series, Tim Drake abandoned the role of Robin and became, well, just Drake. And that actually presented a real problem for me when making this video because I hate this costume so much. But technically, Tim Drake didn't refer to himself as Robin while wearing this costume, or any variation of the name like Adult Robin or Red Robin or anything like that. So I wound up not including this other outfit. But I wanted to give a special dishonorable mention to this generic ripoff of the Grayson series, Wolverine, and even Deathstroke, all rolled up into a blandly colored mess of an idea and slapped onto Tim Drake's character for no apparent reason. Number 2. Schumachers Nightmare. I don't hate Joel Schumacher. I don't think he had the power when it came to making these Batman movies the way Tim Burton or Chris Nolan did. I don't think he really was able to control a lot of stuff when it came to casting or story or anything like that. And I think the things he was able to control, while he had a specific vision for Batman, it really didn't come together. And I also think it's a bit of a shame that his legacy as a director, perhaps unfairly, is tainted by these movies. But I'm just not a fan of what must have come down to his approval of Robin's costume in Batman Forever, since it's hard to believe a studio would be behind something like this. It does hit that pet peeve of mine of having a Robin costume with muted colors, but it does it so much worse than any of the other examples we've talked about by a wide mile so far, doing so with this glossy chrome. And the big problem I have with it all is the contradiction. Burt Ward was never short on silly moments to play as Robin, but his costume matched that tone with the color and the camp. In comparison, most of Robin's outfit in this movie looks like it wants to be taken seriously, but then the movie pairs it with a completely goofy story and, of course, the infamous bat nipples. The whole thing's a mess, especially given that when people try to defend this movie, they usually do so by talking about how kid-friendly it is, which is not a good defense of a costume this overly sexualized. It was brave to try and adapt Robin into the big screen like this back in the 1990s. Even now, DC is very gun-shy about that sort of thing. But I don't believe anyone can make a credible case that the end results of this costume being a strong example of Robin's character. Number 1. Schumachers Second Nightmare. And of course, to top things off, how could we forget our second horrible costume in the form of the one from Batman and Robin? It's the exact same problem, only compounded by the change in color scheme. I actually do like these colors in the broadest, most basic sense. A whole Bat family all in black and gray is a cool idea, but now you have, at least in theory, more serious looking costumes, only to have an even goofier and even sillier movie for these costumes to exist in. So the mismatch between costume and movie is only that much worse in Batman and Robin. And unfortunately, that's pretty much it. These two costumes are totally different in look, but suffer the exact same problems. At a certain point, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, and I did think about grouping them into one entry. But it feels like I'm just doing that because everyone else also hates these costumes and these movies. And that doesn't make these costumes or these movies any less terrible just because there's a bit of a consensus to these things. There was no ranking these costumes anywhere outside of the very bottom of the barrel because in the history of Robin's character, at least visually speaking, this is it. This is the bottom of the barrel. As anticlimactic as it is, as unsurprising as it is to say that these are the worst outfits, it would be silly to pretend otherwise. Oh well, at least Joel didn't make Robin eat any rats. So thanks for watching, everybody. I think we will eventually do a list of Robin's best costumes since I stumbled on a lot of examples of those in doing research for this video. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching, and here's some more rats.